over the IT instructions on how the public can access the meeting. And I will be passing that on to Chelsea. This meeting can be accessed by video conference, telephone, or in person. Testifiers are reminded that there is a 3-minute limit of testimony. And Chelsea, please go over the instructions.
Hello, Chair. For today's testimony, we have a section at the end of the agenda for public comments. If you can remain muted and camera off until that time, the chair will open it up for public testimony. If you are attending virtually and want to submit oral testimony, please use the raised hand command in Zoom, and that's how we will call on you one by one per the requirements of 3-minute testimony.
Okay, so at this point, we're calling the meeting to order, and it is 1:06 p.m. on August the 23rd. The roll call vote, I'm going to take a roll call of the voting members. And when I call your name, please indicate present or here and state who, if anyone over 18 is in the room with you, or you could say alone. This will also serve as a roll call vote. For each subsequent vote, I will ask if there are any objections or recusals. If there are none, then the motion will be approved on the same basis as this initial roll call. So calling on myself here. Don?
Here.
Kathleen Ho. Representative from Department of Health? Excused? Okay. Dr. Wieczorek.
Here and alone.
Thank you. Mary Alice Evans.
Here.
And Director Sniffen or designee.
I'm here, Tammy Lee.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, next order of business is the approval of the minutes for the June 13th meeting. We have a motion to approve the June 13 minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Mary Alice.
I'll second.
Thank you, Don. Is there a presentation? No? Anyone from the public wish to give testimony on the minutes? Seeing none. Chelsea, seeing none. Okay, any discussion by the board? Seeing none, okay. Calling for the vote, hearing no objections, the motion to approve the minutes of June 13th is approved. Item 3, we had some introductions on the agenda. Is there any introductions?
Introduce our legislative members today. I think we have a couple representatives, but maybe we'll just open it up for the legislative members or staff to introduce themselves.
Okay, I see Representative Kristen Kahaloa, if you would go first.
Hello, everyone. I'm Representative Kirsten Kahaloa, representing Hawaii Island, and happy to be here with you guys. And I'm also here alone.
I don't really see any.
Representative Evelyn's office, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Malia. I'm the office manager for Representative Evslin. I'm just sitting in for him today. He represents the District 16, so that's Kauai, that's Lihui, Hanamaulu, Oma'o, and yeah, thanks, guys.
That's all I have.
Okay, that's all we have. Next on the agenda is a presentation. This meeting is dedicated to the budget for the fiscal year 24 year. And what the presenter will be Chelsea. She's going to present the fiscal year 24 HISC recommended budget, and she'll be joined by Rob Hoff. And I guess that would be Franny Brewer. And so take it away.
And mahalo chairs, members of the council or legislative members, thanks for having us here today. Chelsea Arnott with Department of Land and Natural Resources and Program Support for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Rob Hoff, State Protection Forester with Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife.
And I'm Franny Brewer. I'm the manager for the Big Island Invasive Species Committee.
And we're here to present some information on the submittal to approve the recommended fiscal year 2024 Hawaii Invasive Species Council budget. Excuse me. And I'm going to walk us through the budget, the funding process that we've been through to work up to this point. We're also going to carve out a little bit of time to have Franny present on the Island Invasive Species Committee and the importance of HISC funding to these projects. So to start us off, I'm going to pass it over to Rob, who was our chair of the Resources Working Group this year, which we'll discuss.
Do you want me to advance?
Yeah, whatever works.
Okay, good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
members of the council. I am just going to go over a little bit of background about the HISC budget, and Chelsea, please jump in if I forget anything significant, which I just might. So the council was established by statute in 2003 with the purpose of filling gaps between agencies and programs, as well as adding to our knowledge about invasive species to further better management. Each year, the council receives from the legislature a budget that comes through the Department of Land and Natural Resources, which administers the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. And that funding comes through LNR 402. And then the funds get dispersed out to the different projects through DLNR, through this process that Chelsea is going to elaborate on. And then the council approves that budget once it's gone through the process.
It's sensitive.
Oh, it's in that. So this year, we had great representation from all of the council members. So each council member assigned someone to be part of the resources working group. This year, unfortunately, we didn't have anybody from DBET. DBET normally chairs the HISC resource working group. So Chelsea asked if I could fill in for chair since I've been through the process a few times. And as you can see, we had HDOT represented by Tomo Murata, Darcy, and Darcy Oishi, and also Janice were there for HDOA, Janice Matsunaga. Mike Meltzer reviewed proposals for UH. We also had Christy Martin with CGAPS. Who always participates in this process as well because of the close relationship with CGAPS. And then Matt Carano with the Department of Health. And then we also had the Monaghan with Division of Aquatic Resources. And then the HISC staff as well assists us with evaluating. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chelsea so she can explain the process.
So our timeline for, I guess I should turn our video on too, so there we go. I'm sorry, it says FY23, but this is of course fiscal year 24, but we use pretty much the same timeline year after year for dispersal of our Hawaii Invasive Species Council funds. Pretty much near the end of legislative session, we put out the call for proposals. Going out May 1st this year, we put together an informational webinar for potential applicants just to walk them through the process, for them to understand our funding priorities. And then of course we have the deadline for applications. Once applications are submitted, we call on the powers of our resources working group members who really serve as our evaluation committee pretty much. They have the experience and expertise, and we usually try to get applications within their realm, agriculture, transportation, health issues. So we try to make sure those applications go to those specific people and evaluators. We have a meeting where we have open discussion with members of the resources working group about what the actual awards will be. We actually invite the applicants to attend that meeting. That happened on August 7th. It's called our resources working group meeting. And a lot of the folks here in the room also attended that. It can be a little bit of a stressful meeting, but I think we've really come a long way in the process. and being fair and transparent in how we're allocating funds. And then we're here today. This is kind of the capstone of the funding process and presenting that recommended budget to you all today for approval. So just going through drafting the recommended budget, again, the resources working group members are the ones evaluating the applications. Final application scores are entered into an overall spreadsheet, and then the applications are ranked from highest to lowest. So they get a quantitative score based on our funding priorities, which I'll go over in just a second. And what happens is the spreadsheet bases a score based on, bases an award amount based on the quantitative score, how much they're requesting, and then how much we have total available of HISC funds to allocate. So the resources working group meeting is really put together to develop that final recommendation that we're here today to present to you. And it's primarily a discussion amongst members. And then this is just a breakdown of how it's scored. There's 57 points total. We have 5 funding priorities that we ask applications to explain or justify how they're meeting each of those funding priorities, so they can get a total of 45 points. And then they can also get additional points for how many sectors the project benefits related to agriculture, natural resources, etc. And then they can have additional points if they can demonstrate leverage funding. So just background on the funding priorities. We didn't just pull these out of thin air. They're based on what is in our Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan. And then of course our HISC-CGAP's 2025 joint strategy, which is in support of the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan. And you're probably familiar with these at this point, but these are the 5 funding strategies or funding priorities. So they're focused on prevention, early detection, and rapid response for new terrestrial and aquatic invasions. So, species that may not be here in Hawaii yet. And then another strategy is the management of inter and intra-island movement of invasive species, which includes both aquatic and terrestrial species. Implementation of large-scale control of widespread high-impact invasive species. This includes other tools and technology, but not classical biocontrol, just because we have a separate funding priority related to that. So that's the 4th one there, increase specific regional biocontrol research and capacity, and then maintaining an engaged and supportive community. So these are the 5 funding strategy or priorities that the applicants need to demonstrate how they are meeting those or moving those forward. And this is just the overall list. We had a total of 28 applications submitted this year. That's actually a bit less than what we've had in the past. A few years ago, we had around 55 to 60 applications. Last year, we had around 36. So this is definitely a lot less, but what you'll see is the total amount requested is still pretty much the same and climbing and higher. There's still a real need to meet invasive species work needs. And this is the breakdown of our fiscal year 2024 available funding. And I'm just comparing it to last year so you can kind of reference that. So this year, when we added up all the total requests in the application, it comes out around $8.5 million in total requests. We had an appropriation this year of 7.25 million. So that is our baseline general recurring funds of 5.75 million that goes to HISC through the LNR 402. And then we received an additional 1.5 million supplemental this year. Unfortunately, the restriction or the reduction, the 20% reduction that affected our account LNR 402 last year still applied this year. We tried to get that reinstated, but it didn't go through. So basically that supplemental of 1.5 million and the cut of 20% pretty much equal each other. So we're at status quo at the end of the day with our funding. And of course, we're subject to the budget and finance restriction, DOFA overhead. And then we do have, we do support our HISC support program also on there, which is our weed risk assessment, our 643pets.org, and then our planning staff for the Hawaiian Invasive Species Council. So at the end of the day, the remaining total is about 4.1 million that we have available to allocate to these interagency projects and programs. And this is just demonstrating we can never meet the need. So every year we are really having to cut budgets back. Nobody gets their total, their full requested amount. We're always having to either zero out projects that score low or just cut back quite a bit so we can make sure that we're being fair, but we're trying to meet the needs as best we can. But of course, you can see we're always like halfway there to what the total need is. So I'll pause there. We will be presenting the tables that are included in the submittal, but I just want to make sure that council or legislative members, if they have any questions on the process.
Chair, Chelsea, can you give me a little more on the classic biocontrol point category? I'm not as familiar as I should be with that.
Yeah, of course. Actually, Rob, do you want to talk about classical biocontrol?
Sure, as far as, what defines classical biocontrol, what that is that
Yeah.
what the question is? Okay, sure. So classical biocontrol is when we target a pest for control by going to the area in the world where that pest originated. So typically it's a plant or an insect.
Yeah.
And we look for the natural enemies. I shouldn't say we because it's usually Department of Ag or US Forest Service, sometimes University of Hawaii as well. Like DLNR doesn't have any biocontrol research capacity.
Yeah.
So they look for these natural enemies. They might be diseases or parasites, and they look to see whether they're specific to that organism. And if it looks like they might be specific, then they bring them into containment facilities here in Hawaii, and they do studies on them to see whether they'll impact the environment. So they expose them to native or beneficial organisms to make sure that they won't impact them. And then there's a bit of there are a few hoops to jump through with environmental assessments and permits, both on the state and federal side, and for eventual release to control. And so the idea is that you have this long-term control of the invasive species across the landscape without having to continually do chemical control, or in combination with chemical and mechanical control, you reach effective levels of control.
Okay, thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you, Rob. That was a really speedy description of the process. It is, for
That was
what
the
it's
Cliff
worth,
Notes.
it was a Cliff Note version. It takes a lot more than that.
Lot of
The
effort.
permitting and the different protection of the, chapter 343, all that has to go into play. And eventually we find a solution to the willy trees that are dying, and now they're all healthy. But it was a long process and it's frustrating, but that's it in the.
I should mention too that the Hawaii Invasive Species Council website has a great biological control page on the website where it has some great animated information explainers and information on target species as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I do have a question. What was the process in advertising the RFP if you did use an RFP as the method of procurement?
Yeah, we post it on our website, and then we have a HISC listserv where we send out the announcement for the RFP. And in the past, we've gotten applications from other entities, like other universities on the US mainland. I mean, all work has to somehow benefit invasive species management here in Hawaii. So it can't just be some random university project, but I think that's definitely like getting it more broadcast out there is something we should work on. But right now it's just our listserv and the website.
No news release.
No news release.
You were going to say that to steal your thunder.
No, I
Okay,
actually
sorry.
had a slightly different question. So in the past, DVED has had challenges working with the state procurement office when we have a grant program, and we needed to get legislative amendment to various enabling legislation to establish that a grant program is exempt from state procurement. Does the Invasive Species Council have that for this grant program?
So we don't even need to do a competitive grant process.
Right.
Ultimately, it's just the
Because-
council's dispersal of funds. So we don't have the exemption with the state procurement office, but I don't think we need it for the state.
But it's in your,
statute.
it's in your statute?
No,
Okay, all right. Thank you,
I'm
Chair.
with Mary Ellen. If you're using public funds, there's certain kinds of procurement, 5 methods of procurement that you go through. I think you did it though with the RFP.
we do it with the RFP and we use purchase orders and we follow like the procurement.
And did you post your RFP for 30 days, the minimum 30 days?
So we don't go through the official state
Sorry.
procurement system for this because we limit it to other government
Yeah,
agencies.
that's the
There's
difference.
the,
That's
okay,
the
that's-
difference.
that's-
So that's the key, because government to
Right.
government,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
exempt.
Yeah, it's interagency and that's in our application guidelines is who's eligible for it. Private entities can't apply for
Yeah.
the funding.
individuals.
Okay.
Okay, that's very helpful information. Thank you.
No, thank you.
But still, I think the release of the information should be broader.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we can definitely work on that. We'll make note of that.
Chelsea, is there a reason that there's been a reduction in the number of applications? Do you have any idea why? I mean, clearly invasive species is a growing
Mhm.
crisis.
Just anecdotally from looking at past funding processes, a lot of the entities that have applied that aren't applying this year were, again, kind of those research projects that exist in other state universities and they're usually the ones that score the lowest and don't get awards. And so it could be just knowing that they probably aren't going to be funded this year and just don't want to submit a project. And that could be, especially the research projects are usually, unfortunately, the projects that get cut first because they score low typically, and they have small budgets that they're requesting.
Chelsea, I have a question here online. So you mentioned that historically you get about 50 to so application. What percentage of this application every year are repeating PIs versus the new PIs who come with the new ideas and new projects?
I would say this year, it's pretty much 97% of the application are returning PIs and applicants. Department of Agriculture has received funding in the past, but they're definitely newer and they're part of our application process this year. So they make up what I consider that small percentage of a new applicant. even though-
3%, Dexter.
Very small. But yeah, pretty much this year, it was all returning applicants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any hands. Anyone from the public? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Okay, so we're gonna jump into what is in the submittal. We did rearrange it more by thematic area, just to make it easier for the conversation and to understand what each of these projects is, what their goals are with those projects. So to start, I'm gonna have Rob kind of work through the first 2 tables here.
Okay, so to start off with the projects that did not receive funding this year. So the first 2 projects listed there were projects that received low scores. And so the working group agreed to just take them off immediately rather than going through the long discussion of the attributes. We agreed that since they received the lowest scores, we wouldn't consider them. The second 2 on there, the biocontrol of fountain grass and the honey creeper protection on Kauai using the biolarvicide. It was determined that there would be other funds available to support those projects. So we felt like we could move on without funding them.
So Rob, I have a question. When you refer to the other funding, is that what is it, 16 million from Department of Interior that they gave you for the invasive species of birds? protecting
No,
the birds?
we're hoping to fund the biolarvicide work through funding that we received from the legislature
Okay.
for special projects, general funds. We received $20 million for forest management projects. And so our administrator said this is one of the projects that will be funded.
Okay, you're talking about the Department of Interior's
Yeah,
for
Secretary.
the birds.
right.
Correct.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is something
Separate.
different.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I saw honey creepers.
Oh,
somewhere.
good. That's-
Oh, sorry.
I know, I want to do it too.
Okay, so starting out with recommended project awards. These are some projects that are really adding capacity, needed capacity to existing projects. So the first one there is outreach and education for rapid ohia death. That's a position through UH that is on Hawaii Island and has been doing important work on rapid ohia death outreach so that the community is informed about the disease and knows how to prevent the spread of it.
Rob, which page is that?
This one on page,
Starting
this
on?
is the third.
They're not, so
Yeah.
unfortunately, I took them out
22,
of
you're
order.
Okay,
Okay.
The rank is on the slide next to them, so I think you might be able to, are they in order of rank in that?
No,
Oh, they're not.
they're by, you categorize them
Differently.
In
differently.
their ranks.
1, 2, and 3. yeah.
so the highest,
is
the highest
22.
is 1 and the lowest is 26?
Correct.
28.
Okay, so
28.
they're in reverse order.
No, I think
No.
you
Can't
categorize
even- I
them
can't even
by
follow.
categories of applications not recommended funding, applications recommended FY 24,
And then it
and not
does,
considered programmatic.
Rob,
So-
it would be easier if you went by the handout that we have.
welcome to recommendations.
I think that in the previous table that you showed, they were in order of ranking, weren't they? With all the projects. that
Yeah,
why?
so the
I-
ranking goes from
I have
lowest
the other
ranking,
page.
which
I
would be
do.
28,
picked
to
the
highest
lowest.
ranking, which would be 1.
Oh, this was the one they sent out today,
Okay,
I think.
so yeah, so that's that, yeah.
Okay.
that's where they are.
And so I did reorganize them for the presentation purposes
Okay.
versus, so maybe that was a mistake.
that's
but-
okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to look at them ranked individually because they're all such important projects anyway, so.
Okay,
Next time.
yeah, we're good, we're good. Go ahead.
Another project that was to add important capacity is HGOA's biocontrol program. And this was an interesting project where they're going to be working with University of Hawaii, and they're going to be training students to add capacity. And those students eventually may work in the containment facility at HGOA. So we thought that was a very important project, and that's receiving nearly $150,000. The ballast water and hole fouling was our only aquatic invasive species proposal. And so that actually is the only proposal that received full funding because
that's true.
it funds a
Yeah.
position
I see.
to carry out the activities related to ballast water and hole fouling. And so the working group felt that that was a very high priority, so we gave it full funding. And then the CGAT coordinating group on alien pest species, that's a group that we all work very closely with. That was actually the #1 ranked proposal, and it will be receiving $73,000 for all the important work they do on things like stop the rapid ohia death. It really cuts across all of our invasive species priorities.
We do have a hand raised.
Okay, want to stop and take questions?
Recognizing Dr. Bichorik.
Thank you for pronouncing my name so perfectly.
She's been practicing. She's been practicing.
Practicing all morning long. I have a question about strategy behind how much funds is allocated to each project, because speaking as a scientist, so when I put the grant for, let's say, $300,000, I need $300,000 to accomplish my objectives. And like in case of the Hawaii Department of Ag plant industry grant, you're basically allocating half what they're asking for, which did you ask the PIs to reduce the objectives. So how are we going to deal with that? And the question is, that's a good strategy to spreading money around as many projects as possible versus fully funding fewer, but into the full capacity, just a discussion point.
Yes, it's a great question. And on the applications, we have a section where they need to identify the scalability of the project. So do they need their total requested amount for the project to be viable, or can they do with half of their total requested amount? Or is it flexible? Like they'll take any amount of funding. So they indicate that initially on the application. And then of course, we do go through this quantitative scoring process through the evaluations, but the major part of the resources working group meeting is having that discussion and asking applicants when needed, can their project still be feasible with this amount of funding? Or would you prefer to completely remove your project from the discussion? Or can the resources working group find funding elsewhere and meet that need if we all agree that it is a priority? So that's a major discussion point during that meeting.
There's a little bit of negotiation, and all of the applicants who attend the meeting have been very forthcoming and understand that
That's good.
that resources are really tight, and if we like a project, what level can we make something happen in that area?
And you guys do a good job of warning, even on the application. It says on the application, you have to state, can you do this with, is this something you could do with any amount of funding? Do you need at least half of funding, or you absolutely need to have full funding? So even when you're filling out the application, you have a warning that that may be a thing that happens.
And the applicants are in the room while you're discussing the reductions?
Oftentimes, they're invited to participate, and then when the working group asks questions.
Oh, wow, that's
specifically
really
to
good.
them.
Yeah.
So,
Do they not, those applicants who don't come to the meeting, does the review committee review their applications differently since they're not there to answer any questions? You make some assumptions.
There could be in the past discussions. I mean, there could be implications if they're not there to address something, like maybe their project is scalable and they put that it wasn't, and we're just like, we can't meet that, we're nixing it. But if they were there, maybe they could speak to that a little bit more. So it's encouraged for folks to attend that meeting, and we give plenty of notice for attending. But I think we really, we've tried to eliminate the back and forth with our evaluators and the applicants, and we're really trying just to focus the discussion with our resources working group members and only direct questions to the applicants and have that back and forth when directed, because that kind of helps mitigate that.
Okay. Share
Yes.
a question?
Yes.
Since the request totaled 8.7 million, and of course, the amount available was only 4.1. In the past, has the program asked for an amount in either the biennium budget or the supplemental budget that's closer to the historical total requests?
Yeah, we submitted an additional request last year with, on top of that 5.75, that would have brought us up, if approved, it would have brought us up to 8.5 million, which is more in line. Those bars would be more equal, but it didn't make it past the governor's approval. But we're gonna submit again this year through, it's in our forestry and wildlife right now, but we're gonna move it up to leadership and to the governor's office, hopefully, to see if we can get a baseline of, we're looking at 10 million as a baseline. And we're not just leaning on state funds, and that's what Franny's gonna talk a little bit about, is that we do try to identify other sources of funding to support these projects. And that's what's really great about this process, is that not only are we seeing what the needs are and what's being filled, but also the other state departments, the representative from Department of Health, after our resources working group meeting, he's like, hey, there's a huge grant opportunity with the water quality. let's get some of these projects funded through that. So we are always looking for, because all the projects are valid.
Mhm.
They're great projects. We just don't have enough funding.
Been there, done that.
And I'm hoping Representative Kahaloa is here too, but it does make a difference if people come to the legislature and they have to stand up and, invasive species, all of you, speaking to the choir here, you guys know how important it is. So we have to elevate that conversation at the legislature because we're competing with everybody else and not always doing well. So urge all of the applicants, if you haven't got full funding, really come to the legislature and ask. Because I think that makes a difference. We've seen already when you have an empowered community come to the legislature to address an issue, they are much more effective than sometimes government agencies.
And they can zoom in.
They can zoom in too. They can zoom in
That
too.
helps.
But the same thing, they like our working group. If you don't show up to answer questions or to promote your ask, you generally don't get what you're asking, So yes, we could use the help. So everybody in the audience, I suspect Representative Kahaloa would also agree with that it makes a difference when you show up at the ledge. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Vichorek, is that your question's been answered?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, we're good for the next batch.
Yep.
Move on here. Okay, so the White Ant Lab, which is also receiving funding with that special appropriation that we received from the legislature of 500,000, also submitted two proposals. One is the use of detector dogs for finding ants, so we can respond in a timely manner. And this project is using a local contractor, working closely with a local contractor that does dog assisted searching. And so we're funding that to the level of $25,000. And then for the response specifically on the island of Oahu, there was a proposal to support controlling little fire ants on Oahu with their staffing gear. That's receiving $184,000. It was prioritized because of the recent detections on Oahu that the public's very concerned about.
I have a question. Over Project 26, that was the detected dog program was for two islands, Hawaii and Oahu.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
But
correct.
the original was 99. At the 99, would it have been a larger scope of service?
It was,
remember
it was
that
more,
one.
so there was maybe a fourth of that requested amount is actually going to a contractor that does the conservation dog training, and they do it with volunteers, and I think maybe Franny will talk about. You could talk about it better than.
Yeah, we actually are probably just gonna do in kind. With Hawaii Ant Lab, there was some money in there to pay our staff. We're not going to get that money, but we're gonna still support the project.
No, thank you. I was just wondering if the reduction in the amount of funding affected the scope of coverage, and apparently it didn't. Okay, good.
They're creative.
Well, they got volunteers. Yeah,
Thank you.
dipping into that well. Yeah.
Our staff just really likes dogs.
Yeah, okay. You need to start training some cats.
You and your cats.
No, not a choice. There's a lot more of them than dogs.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Deviation.
Chair, I see another hand raised from UH.
Dr. Vichorek?
Sorry, it's me again. I wanted to go back to this conversation of, how much the PIs are asking and how much are they being awarded, and goes back to what percentage of proposal is actually going to be done with such a reduced funding. But also what it starts concerning me is that, for example, here, the Oahu Monitor and Control Project, they asked for 320, they receive 184, and I know that everybody's creative, but now they're saying, oh yes, we can do the same work for 184. So if somebody, let's say from the public or from legislators are listening to this, it might kind of it might maybe sound that PIs are asking for more money that they really need, because on the end, they are just happy with what is given to them. So I was wondering, and I know that's not the case, right? They're just being creative. They're saying, okay, I take what I can. And when I look for other funds, But if somebody would just look at this presentation and not hear this discussion, it starts raising the questions. And so my thoughts here, can we kind of find the way so the projects are more funded, or the proposals are more realistic funding-wise to how much funding is available? So put some kind of cap on proposal, or have 2 different categories, and so on, because almost every single project, or at least so far I've seen 2 that have been cut in half, but objectives have not been cut, so.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. And we're always looking for ways to improve and streamline and keep fairness through the process.
I have a comment for a response. What we've done is we've kind of done that as well. In our proposals, we say you can have up to $250,000 max for your food hub proposal, minimum of 100,000, maximum 250, kind of like what the USDA does. But then again, the criticism is, are they going to the top because it's there? It's kind of hard, but to your point, I think what might be better in this case is to set a max, minimum 100, maximum 250 or something. Find out where you live in this particular RP, and then the PIs are smart enough to work within that. And then at that point, you shouldn't reduce it because they've already worked within the parameters that you've set. Recognizing Christy.
Yeah, mahalo, Christy Martin with Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. I'm going to take off my public hat for a moment and participate as one of those that reviewed and scored. So a couple of things that maybe didn't come out or weren't that clear is that we're required, the applicants are required to describe how they meet different criteria, the plan. And through their proposal, they receive points. And so that's the ranking you see on the side. It relates to what percentage of the total pot of funding you get. So there are smaller reductions in the amount, the higher you rank, the more you meet the goals of the program. And so some maybe that rank closer towards the bottom, 28, get a smaller percentage of that. So that's one aspect. I think the other thing that happens that is really very helpful for us is that we have a chance to review all of the aspects of the grant. We get the funding budget. We can look and see if it adds up, if it makes sense, if it's, as project managers, we all have to figure out, well, will I be able to do it with that?
Yeah.
To get a good product. And so, and when we don't see that information, there is a time period where we can submit questions that gets back out to the applicants, and then we get those responses. So a couple of other things that are going on that you're right. It isn't clear from this process, but that is behind the scenes going on.
Right. And to Anya's point, she is satisfied with the explanation that she learned today. I would speak for her. Her point was the public sees that and is the misconception is that you ask for too much money.
Yeah, that's, I have no doubt that the PI, now, I'm not questioning the PIs or the committee. I'm just saying is that if somebody got hold of this presentation, which they could, this is a public meeting, it looks questionable, let's put it that way. That's all what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry.
We, those of us here and tuning in, we get it, but I think her point is well taken that, it's a little padded maybe, but it's not, but it's the impression.
Yeah, I think we can probably add some description of, what would have been funded with that total amount, but what is going to be funded now that it's been reduced to this much? Because a lot of it does just reduce the scope of the work and the people in the area, just depending on what the project
Yes.
is. So helpful comments.
And just from experience, you do get UIPA requests to see the proposals, to see, and that you don't want to get there because then you have to start redacting everything that, and on and on. So
Just one final question.
Yeah,
I can.
please.
It's evaluation. So these get awarded. Now, what happens throughout the year? How do you determine whether the funds were appropriately used, or, because you said 97% are returned.
Mhm.
So there must have been some satisfaction with the process and with what they got, or is it not? I mean, how do you manage that?
Since I've been in this position, there's been satisfaction, but I know there have been issues and so we do have reporting guidelines. They need,
Okay.
if they're collecting data, they need to submit spatial data.
Mhm.
They need to produce a final report. And we have started going out and doing site visits
Okay,
and
good.
checking in with the projects
Yeah.
and just understanding. Also, once the awards and we start putting together the purchase orders, they need to do a best and final offer. And so that's includes a narrative of the work that's going to be accomplished and the adjusted budget to what their award amount
see.
is. So we have a good documentation of what's going to be happening.
Is this based on advance or reimbursement payments?
Reimbursements.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for that explanation and clarification. And I think that just adding a few words to each slide or somewhere up front or end would remove these questions from other people.
Point well taken. I think Chelsea has made that note.
Mhm.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Moving on. So there were 2 biological control awards made to the U.S. Forest Service. The first one is for invasive millstone. So those are invasive plants that degrade our forests, including Vicuña, Myconia, Tibicina, as well as some other high priority plants such as Himalayan ginger and faya tree. And so we awarded that project $60,000. And then Albizia Biocontrol, we're all familiar with Albizia. They have found a couple of potential agents, and so they're pursuing testing those agents to see whether they're safe. So we wanted to make sure that received funding, and that will be funded at $46,000.
May I ask what that middle picture is?
I
know you were asking
That
too.
picture
You're gonna-
is actually an organism, the Myconia butterfly, that is currently undergoing the rulemaking process at HDOA for permit to be released. So it's already been studied, it's been found to be safe, and I believe it's waiting to go to public hearing in order to get added to the list of restricted organisms so that it can be released into the environment in Hawaii. And so we're working closely with the quarantine branch to make sure that makes it through the process.
Thank you.
Yike.
For various
And after that, it's probably going to go to your meeting.
I didn't know if those would come to us.
So this was our One Department of Health application. So this is for Wolbachia mosquito program. It's actually kind of following the same process of what's happening with controlling mosquitoes to save our native forest birds. But this is focusing on the human health element. So they're kind of stepping up and working on their own process to manage mosquitoes with this landscape level tool through the Department of Health. So the majority of this funding will probably be used for contracting mosquito mate, who's doing the propagation of the mosquitoes with the Wolbachia. There is also a component of this to start doing communications on the use of the landscape level mosquito control, but for the human health element. And with this funding, we'll have to see from the best and final offer if they'll actually be doing that communications piece, since it was reduced to 75,000. And these are some of the University of Hawaii research projects. So this is ranked, the first one is number 24. I'm feeling your pain of this spreadsheet right now. So it's 24, 12, and 23. And this is the first one for 24. This is investigating the ramie moth impacts on plants and insects. So this is an invasive caterpillar that was discovered a few years back. Mark Wright with the University of Hawaii CTAR and his lab have been studying the biology, distribution, and potential impacts, because it does feed on mamaki, one of our native plants in the forest here. And there are mamaki farms over on Hawaii Island especially that are trying to market this. So he's been working on this for the last several years, and HISC has continued to support a portion of his request, usually around this amount, so 18,000. I think last year we awarded the project around 16,000. Another project that is a continuation is detection and control of two-line spittlebug. So again, this is with UHC TAR. This is Dr. Mark Thorne, who's been working on Hawaii Island. And this is a really robust project, and he has quite a bit of staff, and a lot of the staff are based over on Oahu. So a lot of this budget is really geared towards travel and salaries for his staff. But they've been able to produce new management tools. They're looking at resistant grasses because the bug is eating or destroying kikuyu grass, which is one of the main foraging grasses for ranchers. So looking at other alternative grasses that would be a good replacement, other management tools and communication devices. So it's a really robust project. The last one is doing a cost benefit analysis. This is going to be done through UHERO, which is the economic research organization at the University of Hawaii. And if you've ever seen, our presentations that we do for the legislative info briefing, I mean, a major part of the communications is showing the economic impacts that certain pests can have. So this is going to give us some economic numbers to bring to the legislature as we're working on that funding priority for raising biocontrol capacity. So we have a researcher, Kim Burnett, who's done a lot of great work for other conservation invasive species research in the past that will be working on this project.
Chelsea, before you go on, just a comment about the two-line spittlebug. Thank you so much for funding this project. It is currently only in Kona, and your researcher funding this project might keep it in Kona and eradicate it there before it extends beyond, and the pasture lands on a larger scale are impacted. And I think my comment at the Waimanalo meeting was then we'd be asking Don for an invasive species council for two-line spittlebug. So let's hope we get it. Let's hope we get it.
Prevention.
Yeah, prevention's catch it now.
Yeah, it's a big problem, especially once the grass is gone. It's other woody, nasty and invasives that come into the pastures after it. So you have this whole other slew of invasive weeds.
Go Mark Thorne.
So Chelsea, can I ask you on the UHERO, is this a contractor? Isn't this part of what UHERO does? Or is where?
Yeah,
so
it'll be
how come we're
funding.
They're
that?
totally funded by contracts.
I see.
The university does not fund them.
They don't fund them at all?
What their professor levels are funded out of the departments that they
Okay.
come from, like the Department of Economics.
Okay.
But the graduate students that work there and the adjunct staff
Mhm.
have to bring in the grant
Oh, I
money
see,
to
I
fund
see.
their own salaries and expenses. That's not unique to UHERO, that's all university
see, I
institutes.
see. Okay.
Alas.
Wasn't really quite familiar with that process.
Good question.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
And also we have some watershed protection projects that we fund. There's the watershed protection project grant that also comes out of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and that funds a lot of the different watershed partnerships across the state. But we have been funding some work with the Ko'olau Mountains Watershed Partnership that operates here on Oahu. One of the projects is surveying for Tibicina, which is one of the mellostomes that the new biocontrol agents and the other work we're funding for natural enemies will help support. And then also expanding the use of this strawberry biocontrol. So that's the Tectococcus ovatus that forms those galls and reduces the production of fruit on strawberry guava. So this program works in these really remote, unique native ecosystems where they see the strawberry guava starting to encroach in these areas. So they're really well poised to deploy these different, this biocontrol out there. They've also developed an albizia removal capacity. So this is removing small populations of albizia trees from like the most Malca portions of the Ko'olau Mountains, where it's not widespread, but they've also been working with communities on the windward side and Manoa on how to manage albizia in their communities and hazard trees. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because Franny's going to be giving, excuse me, a presentation on the work of the Island Invasive Species Committee. And I wanted to carve out time for her to present on this because when you add it up, a lot of our Hawaii Invasive Species Council funding is dedicated to supporting the Island Invasive Species Committee. And this is because one of the mandates of the funding is to be gap filling. And the invasive species committees are not institutionalized within any department's budget. They are all soft funded. Every year they have to go out and find funding to support their crews that range from 10 to 40 people strong, but we all know that they do critical work and they work between the lines of the departments. So they're able to work in areas that maybe DLNR or H2A can't necessarily work. So we really prioritize making sure that we are funding their basic operations and keeping people employed as best we can, but also trying to make sure we're getting funding to the other research and development of new tools and other projects that are out there. And at our last year's funding meeting, former Chair Case did bring up, well, if they're just putting in the same applications every year, why don't we just carve out funding from them from the HISC budget? And this is something we're just putting it out for the council to consider. I don't have a process or anything to present to you on how to actually do that. But today I just want to put that out there that maybe that could be something we present to the council in the future and just having Franny in just a second share a little bit about the critical role that the Island Invasive Species Committees play. So when we break it down, we consider the Island Invasive Species Committee's programs. And so those are our programmatic asks. And then the rest of the applications you see on there, we consider them project asks. So you can see a majority of the funding is dedicated to supporting the operations of those programmatic asks with the Island Invasive Species Committee, and around 1 million to support the different research, watershed partnerships, and other programs that we presented, and the total of 4.1 million total to support interagency projects and programs. So that's the end of presenting on the disorganized table there.
Okay.
And I am gonna just take a pause before handing it over to Franny to present if Chair wants to open it up.
I'm going to ask my friends over here for a procedural question. At this point, do I have a request to approve the recommendation? Or is that?
Are we there yet?
We're not quite there.
Oh.
I was going to have Franny present and then I'll have Rob read the submittal recommendations and then we can move into.
Do you also quantify in-kind service? Because I know, Franny, there's so many people that are doing volunteer. I really would like to see that quantified. Can we do something like that? I mean, I think that's a missing component. Everybody sees money that's going, but the community's time, I think we really have to find a way to capture that.
In kind.
Yeah, the in-kind. I mean, I would suspect that either supplements or in many instances exceed. I mean, I think there has to be what are the true costs to for the work that's being done? And because I think the message has also got to be to the public as well as to the legislature. So much of this work is really community-based. And this is the value that they're putting in. So when we talk about that, I mean, I'd like to find a way. I think nonprofits and community groups don't do enough of that, don't quantify enough for purposes of getting that we can get credit for that, and that there's some acknowledgement of all the good work that the community is actually doing, because we could never do this without the community. I mean, the money is probably minuscule in comparison to the amount of human time that's being put in. So think about that. If there's a way that we can quantify so that we can demonstrate to the legislature, your monies are actually being tripled by what the community puts in.
I believe my staff has watched both the guys on the agenda for the next meeting.
Okay,
Would
thank you.
like to echo that because we can show by showing this in-kind contribution is that we are totally exceeding amount of money that we get from legislators. And then we can say, okay, this money that you give us grows to so much of community. So I would like to echo that. That's a fantastic point.
Yeah, I mean, as well as we can also ask, private sectors are beginning to step up, NGOs, but large landowners, I mean, we have to find a way to sustain this. Grants are just, I think you need a predictable source of funding.
That's right.
Yeah. Not every,
We're aware.
yeah, no, how you guys continue to all be so committed on, like, we don't even know if we're going to get money next year to pay for everybody. So, I mean, there's got to be some way that we sustain this. So how do we get everybody to collaborate? You've got government, you've got the community, and we've got to start looking at larger private landowners contributing to this pot as well.
That's a novel idea.
Maybe it shouldn't be so novel, but we may not have a job tomorrow, Sharon, you and I, because of the novel idea.
I know.
But again,
Hey, don't throw me in there.
but think about it. I think it's helpful when we do go to large landowners and ask for contributions or ask for, watershed management, sharing of that costs. And we can actually quantify what is the community putting in, what's government putting in, and those of you who are large landowners, what's your contribution? Think about it. Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here,
Thank you.
and I'm manager of Big Island Invasive Species Committee, but I'm going to be representing all of the HISCs today, although we have representation in the room. Auntie Lori from MOMISC is here for representing this. She's wishing I didn't put her on. And then we have Tiffany and Nate. Tiffany is the manager of HISC, and Nate is the manager of OISC. So we're
great.
all here in the room. But I'll be speaking on behalf of all of the HISCs today. But if you have questions, you can ask me. Okay. There you go. As I'm sure you all know, there's an HISC for every island. And although we are very close and we talk to each other all the time, we share lessons learned and we communicate, we're actually very independent in the way they work. Just the way we all work is because we have different invasive species on the different islands and they're in different stages of management. And to that end, we all have an advisory committee or a steering committee. And I swear this is the most words you're going to see on a slide from me today. We have folks from all of these different agencies, not represented necessarily on every single island, but at least one HISC representative from each of these federal, state, and county. So we have a wide breadth of expertise and knowledge. And then we also have kind of a depth where we can get in-depth in conversations about various different things. And we have their guidance and they have our expertise as well. So it's a really good format and structure as far as getting the work done on our individual islands. You'll see us, the HISCs are very much, because we are gap fillers, we're very much the folks that show up at like every working group meeting and every task force. There's an HISC person on, we're on a lot of different working groups. And because we're employees of RCUH, we're not state or federal, departmental agency employees, we have some more flexibility with the way that we can work. And I'll give you an example of how that worked really well on the Big Island. If you guys are familiar with the albizia tree, really bad guy. This tree grows extremely fast. It's the fastest growing tree in the world here in Hawaii. And it puts on weak very quickly. So it's very weak wood. So you get these massive 200-foot tall trees with these limbs that are extending out very far over, it can shade out a 1/4 acre of land, one tree. And those limbs can shear off and drop very quickly with a light breeze. So this is a really dangerous tree, public safety hazard. And in 2014 on the Big Island, we actually faced Tropical Storm Iselle. And if you talk to anybody who lived in Puna at that time, they'll tell you it was like bombs were going off all night long in the forest because hundreds and hundreds of trees came down. And in the morning, what people found was houses were crushed, cars were crushed, water tanks were crushed. And in a district where 77% of households are on water catchment. This was a huge health risk and a huge health impact. Streets were blocked for emergency access, egress. So the community really had to come together. And one of the biggest issues was the power lines, the utility lines were pulled down, and it was up to 3 weeks to get power restored in a lot of parts of Puna because there weren't enough power poles in the entire state of Hawaii, and HICO had to actually ship out to the mainland to get power poles delivered. Ironically, the year before, in 2013, we had started working on a pilot project with a community in Puna where everyone had a role, right? Everyone has a role with Albizia. So the community backed up onto a forest reserve. So the forest reserve had some Albizia trees that were hanging over the main entrance to the road. There's the right of way that the Department of Transportation on one of the roads on one side, and then there's the roads inside, which are Department of Public Works from the county, right? And then we have Hawaiian Telecom and HELCO and power lines. Everyone has some role in taking care of that Albizia, but nobody really has all of it. And I mean, if you're a utility working within a right of way, that tree is probably well far out of your right of way. It's affecting your infrastructure, but it's not actually where you have the ability to access it. So this is where the HISCs come in, right? Because we can get those private property permissions. This is something we do regularly. Go get that permission, get onto that land. We work directly with the community, worked with the community association there. There was new herbicidal technique that was coming out of CTAR, and we were able to bring that to the community, teach them how to use it safely. And so they were able to take care of the smaller trees. We worked with all the different agencies to get those bigger trees taken down. And this was a way of all of us coming together to work where no one agency could do it. And we were kind of the glue that held this project together. And in fact, these guys woke up the morning after Azelle with just a bunch of wet lawn furniture as compared to the rest of Puna. So it really was something. And we tried in the years since then to continue to get funding to work with various stakeholders to continue pieces of that. And the reason that we're so good at that private property thing is because that's really the core work for the 20 years or so that the HISC has been around. Our core work is plant assessment, evaluation, and sometimes eradication. In order to find these plants, there have been 14,000 plants that have been introduced to the state of Hawaii. We don't know which one of those are going to be bad guys, but you're looking at a pretty deep field to try and find the ones that are misbehaving. So we put a lot of effort into that, and that often means that we have to go onto private property or working with large landowners. We have to figure out who owns this area that we can get in there and look for that plant. And right now we're using a lot of new technology. It's great. Everybody's got a phone in their pocket. We're really trying to encourage the public. I would say in the last couple of years, I've looked at hundreds, maybe 400 pictures of plants and insects and lizards and blobs that don't look like anything, but really trying to have those eyes and ears out there. We're using stuff like iNaturalist now to find these plants, and we're screening them using the Hawaii Pacific Weed Risk Assessment, which is also funded by the HISC, and that gives us an alert, like, ooh, this one could be a bad guy. But is it acting bad here in Hawaii? What's it doing? Is its pollinator here? Is it reproducing in a certain way? There's a lot of work that goes into assessing all these plants. In Hawaii, HISC has really led the way in coming up with a great evaluation process that we're now modeling our process off of. They had a PhD student a few years ago who did her PhD on this work, I believe, botanist. She was amazing. And so we're able to evaluate those plants. Maybe it's something we don't need to do right away. We're just going to keep an eye on it, but now we have data that people in the future can look back and we have excellent mapping capacities, excellent on the ground capacity. And then if it reaches to the point where we're like, no, this is maybe super bad and we need to respond to it very quickly, then it can go into eradication status. And currently throughout the islands, there are 56 plant species that are targeted for eradication. And we've assessed those that we believe that those eradications are feasible. Now it's not the same plants on every island, right? So one plant might be up for eradication on one island and the other island we're like, it's too far gone, or they don't have it, right? So it's 56 plants on one or more islands that are targeted for eradication. And we're actually really very good at this work. These are some of the species that have already been eradicated through the work of the HISCs. I will say that we have 2 right now that are 10 at HISC that are 10 or more 10 or fewer plants away from eradication. And you're probably thinking, well, there's just 10 plants, go get them, which we do, but you have to think about seed viability, which is something that we have to pay attention to. So if it's a 5-year seed viability, guess what? We're visiting every year for 5 years. We got to look and see if those keiki are coming up. So it's not fully eradicated until the seed bank is no longer viable. You've probably seen some version of this before. I'm throwing a lot of information at you, so I kind of want to use this framework to tie in the work that we do. This is the invasion curve. One thing I don't really like about this is that time bar on the bottom makes it look like time just moves forward and this is an inevitable progression. But the work that we do in invasive species is often about trying to push back against that time bar, right? And the work that I just was sharing with you about the plants, all of those plants are in that yellow box. These are temporal boxes. These are all time boxes. And all that work that we do on plants is we're pushing back from yellow into green. We're going back, we're turning the clock back on those plants. We're going to push that back into the green area. And we do a lot of that, right? And the way that we do it is with that line, that little bar that says early detection. And you folks know early detection is not passive. The early detection is very active. It's vigilance, right? And vigilance is something that where you have to be on top of it. You have to have a plan. And so a lot of the work that we do, for instance, the HISC also funds the Port of Entry Exit Pest Monitoring Program, or PPIMP, which is an unfortunate acronym. But this is something that, we provide staff, other agencies provide staff. We're going to the airports, we're going to the shipports, we're looking for these high risk pests that are moving around the islands. And the HISCs all provide staff to do this work, actively looking for these pests, holding that line of vigilance. And if it gets into that yellow zone, we find something, our work is going to push it back into green, right? So we do this with all kinds of things that slip through. HISC, you have the proud HISCers there with their pregnant mongoose, They're going out at 10:30 at night to the nursery and hand capturing cookie frogs. Maui's down to its last population murdering parakeets, right?
Wow.
Everybody's really working on,
That's amazing.
yeah. So everybody's really working on really pushing back on these things and keeping them in that yellow box or pushing them back into
That's
that
encouraging.
green box, right? On one of the other things that all of the HISCs participate in, we all participate in rapid ohia death monitoring and response, right? So as you know, on the Big Island, we have pretty widespread rapid ohia death impacts, but here on Oahu, there have only been 12 detections of rapid ohia death. And that, again, it really comes down to vigilance. So on this island, over 11,000 acres have been surveyed. You have to survey and resurvey with rod because you have to see those brown crowns in the top of the tree when they're pretty fresh. Once they fall off, you can't really tell a dead tree in the forest canopy. So they need to be going out and searching. And once you find that brown crown, you get back, you have your sketch map, you get the GPS points, you get back. Where is that? Who owns that property? You have to get access to the property. Oh, it's a 2-hour 4-wheel drive trek and then a 2-hour hike. Get your boots on, let's go. We got to get to that tree. And we have to sample that tree and determine if it has rapid ohia death. And if it does, then there's management strategies. You may be taking it down. You're trying to use some techniques to prevent ambrosia beetles from getting in there and carrying it, right? So we do a lot of work in that vigilance zone, and again, that yellow, and trying to push it back. We also all of us respond to requests from the public. So here on Oahu, 61% of the rod samples that they found, the trees that were rod affected, came from people calling and saying, hey, there's a sus tree out here, can you come look at it? And they have a team that goes out and grabs that tree. So I'd love to say we spend all of our time in yellow pushing back to green, and that's just the loop we get to stay in all the time, but it isn't always the case. One of the things, and for the legislators and legislative staff who are online, I want you to notice in that orange box that public awareness typically begins. That's when you guys start to get phone calls, right? So we've already moved through quite a lot of cycles before the phone calls start. But a lot of times, again, I think this implies that we're moving. This is an inevitable movement into the red, and it's not. That orange containment zone, though, is not a management strategy in and of itself. Remember that these boxes are temporal, right? This is time. So when you have containment, you build the strongest borders around whatever you're containing, however you're containing it that you can, but you only have so much time before it's going to push one way or the other. So if you're containing an area with little fire ants, someone who lives there is going to get in their truck, going to go to the beach. They're going to put their camp, back the truck. They're going to put their camp topper in there or whatever. And then next thing you know, you've got a new spot, right?
Yeah.
So containment can get leaky and things can move. So it's really important that you're holding that line because you're going to try and get enough resources to push it back. And I think a lot of times when it gets into that widespread zone, it can be a little depressing, but I want to talk about what Maui did, because Maui had a 175-acre infestation in a wet vegetated gulch. And that is, for little fire ants, that's heaven, right? These are South American rainforest ants. So they got into this area and they were living their best lives. This is a great place for ants. And I'll be honest with you, and my Maui people are going to be like, when I heard about this infestation, I was like, oh, they're screwed. This is not going to happen. But after a lot of work, NISC really worked with Hawaii Ant Lab to develop a technique that has not been used anywhere else in the world. They have been on national news, international news. This is something new and innovative. Took them a lot of time to get this correct, and now we're down to no detectable ants. And that's amazing. And I mean, the last time I saw Brooke, and I said he had done a presentation. He said, "Oh, we found 3," and I was like, "Oh, you found 3 sites left with ants." He said, "No, we found 3 ants." I was like, what? So, I mean, you can be in that orange zone and you can push it back into yellow. It's possible, but it's the forces get harder the more you move along that line. So the more force you have to use to push back. And of course, there's that ugly, scary red zone on the end. And I can speak for the Big Island and saying it's not a great place to be because we are there with a lot of things. And we see the impacts of not managing these things. So when things get into the red, I think we don't want to throw up our hands and say, oh, there's nothing to be done. I think there's still a lot that we can do. And especially as to what you were talking about, Chair, moving towards really working with our communities. And that's something that we do a lot of working with our communities because we have so many pests that are widespread. And the Big Island, if you're familiar with kind of the mosaic of our landscape, we have forests and farms and residences all in a mosaic on top of each other. They're not separate parts of the island, right? So there's a lot of crossover where people are dealing with things and there's a lot of vulnerability there. So we work really hard with our community to address these various pests, helping them figure out what plants they should be planting, what plants they shouldn't be planting, teaching people, we have a year-long program working with communities to help them treat little fire ant in their communities. NISC has same thing. Ongoing community relationships for coqui frog, where they work directly hand in hand with the community over a long period of time, right, to get rid of coqui. And so these kinds of programs where we're in the community and we're providing resources and we're teaching people, that's what we're doing when it's in the red zone. We don't just throw up our hands and say, well, we're out now. And this is just a few numbers. This isn't by any scope the entirety of what we do in community engagement.
Yeah.
We go into schools. We're working with classrooms. We have lots of hands-on activities. Person-to-person contacts can be anything from volunteers going out doing out planting, people coming to our albizia trainings, our little fire ant trainings, our planting classes. We're going to like neighborhood groups, neighborhood watch, garden community talks, just anything that we can get to. And we're very, very active on social media. So, I mean, across the HISC for 2022, which was actually a low year because we still had the shadow of COVID hanging up over us, we had about 750,000 contacts. And we're on track to do even much more than that in 2023.
That's exciting.
So this is like the not fun part. That's all the fun part. That's all the stuff we do. But as I said, we spend a lot of our time in each of those boxes and we think about how much do we need to do this to the best of our ability to like really meet all the need that is out there. And we come to the HISC and we say, this is what we really think we're going to need. And as we know, money is a finite resource and we don't ever get all the money that we ask for. But we're very reliant on this funding because it's operational funding. This is the funding that I need to have my infrastructure, my core staff, my GPS units, the person who takes that GPS data and analyzes it and creates the maps, you know, the financial folks, the everybody who's kind of the core, you know, putting vehicles on the ground, putting gas in the vehicles, our rentals for our base yards, all of that core infrastructure and, you know, staff, PPE, you know, equipment. I got to buy my staff 3 pairs of boots a year because that volcanic rock is murder on your boots. And, you know, we need to have the funding to keep these programs going. We're very good with leveraging. Just over the last 3 years, what we've gotten from the HISC compared to what we've been able to bring in from other sources, particularly federal sources. So we're very good at leveraging. But I think it's important to note that at this point, these funds, when we're getting from private grantors or we're getting from other agencies, they're usually very project specific. So it's like, this is specifically for a species or an area or a certain goal. And it's not going to be as core operation friendly, right? So that's a challenge that we always have. And if you're wondering, you know, wow, that's a lot of money, where does it all go? I want to assure you, it's going to people. Our best, most important resources are people. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of other agencies as well. But this is just based on my budget this year for BISC, but the other ISCs are very similar. Most of our money is to pay for people, materials and supplies. So when we're talking about trimming, there's not a whole lot of fat on my budget. When we talk about trimming, we're talking about, I have to look at those faces and go, oh gosh, one of you's going back to school this year, right? You know, because it's really hard. We're small organizations, and every dime that we're getting, we're putting into our people. And people don't do this work because of the glamour and the incredible perks, right? Unless you love being in a forest on my native birds, in which case it is an incredible perk. But you're doing it because that's what you love, and that's the advantage that you have. So for us right now, it's a challenge because we're having trouble attracting and keeping people because we're at this point, our entry level is competing with Jamba Juice and Target for jobs. And we're asking a lot of people. I'd love to be able to pay them more. But funding doesn't keep pace with what the need is. So this, I want to be clear that this is percentage points, right? So we're talking about the consumer price index increasing every year by 2% or more. And HISC funding that we're getting for the ISC is only increasing by 1% at best. And that's not consistent. If we go back and look at this slide, some years our funding went down, which means in one year I'm getting 800,000 and next year I'm only getting 600,000. So it's not even like, oh, well, I can consistently count on around this much and I can plan for next year with that much. It can really, in some years you can take a hit and then you're really struggling to figure it out. So, you know, this is the important part for us is we want to be able to guarantee these people, you are going to have a job and we want you to come back next year because we invest a lot in training. You can come out of high school with no additional education. You can get a job in an ISC and you work and we'll do on the job training, tons of training. You know, we give you a skill set. You can go into a lot of career paths. We also have, if you come out with an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, we have places for you. And, you know, for me, I'm a former teacher, K-12 teacher here in Hawaii, and that brain drain, right? Our kids go to college and then they leave. And we want to be able to say, no, look, you can get a good job here. You don't have to leave. You know, you can work here and be a part of this work on the INA. But it's hard to attract and maintain people when we're not able to keep pace with what we pay and all the little things. Yeah.
I do, Chair, I have a question about so the Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit at UH, a lot of times when we send money to UH, the University of Hawaii system takes a cut through the Office of Research Services that's fairly substantial, even for state agencies. I presume that's a friends and family rate, which means it's much higher.
That too.
Much higher. But you're also, is the funding that HISC gives to the ISCs, is it going directly to RCUH at their level, which is 3.5% administrative overhead, or is it going through the Office of Research Services, which takes a 10% cut?
Yes. is going through Office Research Services.
Okay.
So about 10% is going to RCH and about 5% is going to PCSU. It depends on where the funding source is. On certain federal grants, there's a limit. And we do have a nonprofit arm, so we work with them as well, and they take a little bit less, but it's around 15% on average that goes. And that's, they do all of our HR. And
No, they're great.
Yeah.
That is not a question. Actually, it's the Office of Research Services one, which I know is important to the university's, overall administration, but it is a fairly hefty, amount for small programs.
Yes, I think that's true. For small programs, it is.
I don't know that there's an answer to that, but I do think it makes a difference for these small types of programs. I do understand RCOH is fabulous. We like work. We also go to RCOH for certain kinds of, but we have federal funds, and so that's not as challenging. RCOH will accept federal funds with the governor's approval, but otherwise, expensive.
Before I call on Dr. Wieczorek, I guess my question is a little unusual, maybe. Are we allowed to recruit from HISC? I'm talking government DHERD. There are so many vacancies on the state level,
You wanna steal
1/3.
our
I
employees.
know, I'm sorry. You sense my hesitation. But at the same time, I want you to know it's a two-way street. You're recruiting from us too.
Yeah,
It's- So it's, so
No, we actually have trained many folks who've gone on to be on field crews at NARS. We've gone on people who've worked in Department of Ag, I believe OIS or KISS. One of you guys said somebody went on to Department of Ag.
We've
just
had 3
recently.
people over the last 2
Jonathan
years.
Ho used to work for
really,
Yeah, so we are definitely a training
well,
ground.
it comes to mind because our staff is at a career day today
Oh, wow.
and recruiting. So if it would be, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be good if DHERD, the big DHERD, could do
Yeah.
recruiting at that level? So, and it's a
And
two-way
we-
street,
We would love to see those positions filled, so I think we'd be very supportive of trying to work more in partnership for that, for sure, yeah.
She's laughing, but Dr. Wieczorek?
I'm not laughing. Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit. I wanted to just say thank you for this amazing presentation and for everything your people are doing. You guys are amazing. That's all what I wanted to say. Thank you. And I can hear the dedication and excitement in your voice. And
Passion.
Well, I only have 2 slides, and this is I just want to give you that example of how these bodies, that we're putting these people, this really works, right? When you look at Maui remember that the Big Island for a long time was a containment zone for a number of a leaky container, right? So we have little fire ants leaking out onto other islands, and in the beginning, when you start having them pop up, no one has dedicated staff. And so you have a lot of people running around trying to carve out from what they're already doing and head out there to try and work on little fire ants. And over the years, as things popped up more and more and more, as I had shared with you earlier in that example, Maui really was able to get a large amount of funding to put towards hiring dedicated staff. And they hired 6 field workers plus a dedicated coordinator. It does amazing organizational work. And then they had money for also their outreach staff dedicated to working on little fire ants in the community. And so that was where they are. Now, Oahu has had people, again, pulling from all these different agencies, carving out time. And in the last couple of years, Hawaii Ant Lab has been able to build up to 2.5 people full-time on Oahu. OIS doesn't currently have anyone dedicated to little fire ants, but their outreach staff are giving as much as they can. I think they're working 90% of the time, even though that's not, they're supposed to be working on all these other things, and that's where they are. But you can see the difference in how much is in the red, right? That's what the difference is when you can put those bodies in the position where you can push back out of that orange zone and into the yellow and have less and less going into the red. It really is, that's the key, right? If we want to be successful within this species. So, and I do believe that Nate has plans to try and do that for Oahu. So that's exciting. I don't want you to leave you like it's dark days. But if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them, or you can, obviously, this will be for the public. You can email us.
That's great. Thank you.
Any public hands, anyone from the public wants to ask Franny a question? No? Okay, Franny, that was amazing. Thank you. Back to
Thank
Chelsea.
you for allowing us to do that.
Thank you for all you guys' good work. That's really made a difference. You have to take the show on the road. Get people like pictures, but just what a difference one person can make. Those dots. I mean, Oahu of all places, they need to invest. I think, that community outreach is just so invaluable to get us towards, beyond towards the containment and the prevention. So keep up the good work. I have to figure this out,
Well, we are very creative and flexible,
Yeah.
so we're open to ideas.
I'm trying at DLNR to our MQs, to change our MQs so that they are, rather than only having a degree, you get equity or you get parity for place
User
based.
experience.
So that we can start getting kids from the high school, getting kids who have a passion for doing this, but they don't, so having a career path doing this work.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get our MQs to be changed.
So are we.
Yeah. So
great.
there's a few that we've done already in DAR, and we're trying to get DOFA to move into that direction, but also trying to create MQs that promote internal mobility, so that, you don't have to just have a degree. You can have years of experience, and then you can move up to a different. So we've got to find a way to keep people and to just encourage more people to join this effort. So it's hard. Yes.
And to your point about community, maybe they should start giving credit for volunteer work. Years of service, because that's a tough one for us.
Yeah.
Right out of college, they don't have the years of
Right.
service, but if they can count the volunteer stuff,
Yeah.
that
Well,
would help.
I mean, I think like funding sources, federal and NGOs, if that can be your contribution, that we can quantify the in-kind to be the dollar, to be equivalent to a dollar fund, so that we can that can be our match. So state match, or, so federal funds, but doing something
That would
like
be
that.
good.
Yeah. Looking at that,
Yeah, that would be helpful.
because sometimes we're strapped because we don't have that state match. But if we can use the in-kind service as the equivalent for a match, then we might be more eligible for funding.
I'll write that down.
I think we have to be creative.
Very creative,
yeah,
yes.
I think
We
we have to be
certainly will use it for,
Yeah.
some of the private grants that
Yeah.
you've gone after. We can use that in
Yeah.
kind.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I just wanted to acknowledge comments in the chat. Just Representative Kahaloa sends mahalo to all the ISC and the managers, and I just want to echo that. Franny from Kameen Hawaii Island, Tiffany from Kauai, Auntie Lori from Molokai, and Nate, he's on Oahu, but thanks for being here. And then also Deputy from Department of Transportation, Tammy Lee, had a comment. Deputy Lee, I don't know if you want to expand on, it was from the Albizia conversation. I think it'd be confusing if I just read your chat.
Yeah, okay, Chelsea, thank you. So in session 2022, the legislature passed and the governor signed Act 248 for Albizia and other invasive species removal, and partnering with a utility on a 2-for-1 basis. And so we thought at first that we could use our existing tree trimming contracts to do the removal, but since we couldn't, and since they're generally on our right of way, but they are HICO utilities intertwined, we asked the state procurement office for an exemption to just directly work with HICO, because they're the only, the utility that can do the removal. And so we got that exemption until the end of June of 2024. And so we're just starting to get the first invoices now for the removal.
That's
job.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
creativity. There you go.
And you can follow up with me if you'd like. We've worked with HDOT and Helco in the past with the contracted arborist to do the small stuff at the same time, once the permissions are gathered. And that way you hopefully are putting it off where you don't have the same problem in 10 years. So we're happy to talk to you folks about that if you're interested in pursuing it.
Sounds good, Franny. Thank you.
And Chair, with permission, we can move back to the submittal and we can move through the recommendations for the council to approve the fiscal year
I
2024.
thought we were gonna wait for Rob.
Yeah, he'll read this, he'll read the.
Oh, yeah,
recommendations.
absolutely. I need a scorecard.
So do I. So in the submittal is the legal authorities, the Hawaii revised statute 194 that establishes and authorizes the HISC. I'll move into the recommendations for the council.
Okay, so we have three recommendations in the submittal. The first is the approval of the FY24 recommended budget from the HISC Resource Working Group. That is in your attachment 1 of the submittal. Secondly, should there be any variation in funds available through additional restrictions that come from the Department of Budget and Finance, or increases in availability if there are releases. Chelsea and her staff would have the flexibility to apply those additional restrictions or additions of funding to the best uses with these proposals. And finally, if there's any changes in implementation in the projects, that we have the ability to work with the projects to revise deliverables as needed.
So moved.
So moved.
And I'll
Yep.
second the motion.
Okay, any discussion from the public? No hands? Hearing none. Discussion from the board? None? So take a vote, time to vote.
Okay.
Any objections?
Nope.
Nope. Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Very good. Congratulations. Hey, everybody.
We did have some submission of testimony. It wasn't related to the fiscal year 2024 budget, but it's included in your meeting packet. So I'll pass it over to you, Chair. I don't know if anybody's present with public testimony, but I'll leave it to you. So.
Oh, yeah, is there public testimony on the testimony submitted?
It is
Board?
that
Oh,
gentleman.
I'm sorry, didn't see you.
Hi, no, we don't have comments on the budget or testimony. We're here in an informational standpoint. For the Stealth and Invasive Species Committee, we deal with feral cats. And we wanted to introduce ourselves to
Okay.
the committee.
Yes, okay, very good. Hi, how
I'll
are
make a
you?
presentation,
Yeah.
but we're just seeing how this works and
Okay.
hoping that we can connect with you folks and your staff and become a liaison with the committee as far as feral cats are the stealth the stealth invasive species. It's like the call is coming from inside the house. So
Could you
we
identify
just wanted
yourself,
to
sir?
introduce ourselves. I'm Tom Holowach. This is my wife Holly, and
Yes.
we are from Popoki Place, Hawaii,
Yes,
a
nice
wild
to see
cat
you.
sanctuary, and we are also in the process of setting up a working committee called Popoki Partners, where we're partnering with the people who are doing what we're doing on the other islands and creating an informal working group
Great.
among all of the
That's excellent.
islands so that we can basically create one point of contact to
Yeah.
funnel things through you or get things
Yeah,
back
yeah.
from you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you guys are coordinating. I will,
Looking for land.
yes, and I will say, Department of Land and Natural Resources has expressed a willingness to partner with the various, like Popoki, to provide available state land for a cat sanctuary. On the condition that, one of the conditions is that, yeah, that priority is given to DLNR, where there's colonies, like for bird sanctuaries or up in the, that they'd be given also preference. Yeah.
We're working with Marigold at Dauphin. We're
Right.
starting to make some connections with some of the other things. Holly was just on the Insights on PBS a couple of weeks ago and talked with the Island Archipelago people on Kauai and also the NOAA Marine Mammal.
Yes, yes, yes.
So we're starting to get the word out that we're in the business of trying to save invasive species by controlling, or endangered species by controlling invasive species.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your good work.
Yeah, the reason that I reached out to Dawn earlier was a knee jerk. Because every time there's a feral cat question, it's poor Dawn.
Yeah,
But she's
like-
handling it very,
Well-
she's the right person.
Yes, we were.
I wanted to do that for you, Sharon, and you can do that sometime, so you can understand the full scope of what we have.
Yeah,
Sure,
We
sure.
brought some brochures if anybody's interested in learning more about what our plans are. I can learn more about us at thepokeplace.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other testimony? Yes.
Chair, I just wanted to make sure to summarize some of the testimony that was submitted and just put it on the public record. So the first testimony we had is from, that's in the packet. It's from David Davis, and he is actually submitting testimony that's explaining a potential tool to manage koki frogs. He actually submitted this
Oh, I remember
testimony
that, yeah.
at our last budget meeting with the former chairs of the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. And former chair Shimabukuro Geyser said she would follow up. So this person just wanted to put that tool back onto the council's radar. And then the other three testimonies are from community members on the windward side of Oahu, coming out of the Windward Town Hall meeting and just addressing their concern for invasive species, specifically little fire ant, koki frogs, and coconut rhinoceros beetle, and asking for the council's assistance in managing those on Windward Oahu.
Thank you. But Chelsea, I when I first read this, the word pesticide comes to mind. And I'm wondering if Dr. Davis should be working with the pesticide branch, because anything pesticide that comes to my desk, I'm going to refer to Dexter, who's currently the PI administrator, because he doesn't really describe what he's doing. It's kind of, and I know it's proprietary, it's vague, but anyone looking at this would have a hard time approving or moving forward with it. It's a little vague. So maybe we can work through Dexter and the pesticide. I did read it and I was like, what is this about? Because there's really nothing you can grab onto,
Yes, I can reach out to Dexter and Pesticides branch and see if we can make a
I
connection.
mean, if it can save the world, then hey, let's go for
More
it.
tools
But
in the toolbox.
more tools, but we can't even, it was hard. It was hard to determine if this was on that side or if it's measurable, science-based and realistic, all those. Okay, so that's the comment that we did read it and we need more.
Okay, that's noted. And then I did receive just one additional comment from the manager of the Maui Invasive Species Committee that she wasn't able to join online, but to go on with the presentation Franny presented, just to make the council aware that they're able to accomplish a lot more because they also get a good portion of funding from the county of Maui. And there's been a lot of really great support. So she just wanted to make sure the council was aware of that.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
And Chair, if I can I make two comments? One, I do want to acknowledge both Chair Hurd and I attended the Waimanalo community meeting this week, which was on invasive species.
Was it this week?
Yeah, yeah, it was Monday, was it? Monday, I think it was Monday. Yeah, I think it was Monday. Well attended by the community, but I think, we all recognize them, as Franny pointed out, it's really community-based, and that's clearly what that community showed. I would like, perhaps at our next HISC meeting, or at least, staff to consider, in light of the fires, we're going to have invasive species coming out. So, I mean, I think we have to start being proactive on how are we, right now, it's very raw, it's very emotional, but I mean, I think the reality is we need to start thinking proactively. What kind of efforts do we use from a management standpoint? Something's going to fill those areas that have been burned. And what are we doing to address some of that, now?
It's the opportunistic plants,
Yes.
the weeds and the.
Yeah, and so, and we know that, the utilities are gonna start, they're gonna start replacing those poles. So, what kind of guidance, I mean, I really wish they would all think about undergrounding.
Oh, yeah, we
But-
brought that up. It's like,
Yeah,
it's
but
too expensive.
yeah, but it may not be so expensive, I mean, in light of, so anyways, just a thought, but perhaps you guys can be, kind of proactive in reaching out and being part of when they move into the recovery stage, having the available resources there to work with them. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anything, Mary Alice? No. I want to thank Dawn for very sensitive comments and always reaching out to the community. Mary Alice, always, your institutional knowledge is incredible. I want to just carry on one thing that Chair Dylan, our Chair Don Chang said, is that the legislative session coming up, it is so important for you to show up in person if you can, but Zoom in if you can. Because if it's an issue that you're interested in, definitely make a testimony. However, even if it's not an issue that directly impacts you, your work, submit testimony as well, because that helps the issue. Yeah, an issue that is DOA, might be DLNR. I see, I'm gonna pick on the hemp people. They're very active, very, very active. When a bill is heard for hemp, 2 people show up for the hearing. But it's everybody that should be commenting on however you feel, yes or no. Whatever you feel. Do you want to have more regulation? Do you want to have hempcrete? Do you want to have hemp wood, which is termite resistant and fireproof? We want to hear from you. I mean, it really strengthens the legislative process to hear from everybody, community engagement. If you have an opinion, make sure the legislature hears it. And here comes ledge session in January. So that's our plea from the board. So with no further discussion, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Any objections from the board? Hearing none, the motion is approved. We are now adjourned.
What would happen if there was a motion to object to the
We just
adjournment?
played deaf ear. We just played deaf ear.
That's why I never asked the question.
But when is the next meeting?
It's a quarterly meeting. I'm not too sure.
Every time I say that, I mean, I give the wrong date, like yesterday.
Oh,
It was on my minutes. It said September 19th,
oh, no.
and then it wasn't.
No.
Oh,
Nice to see you again.
It's our new brochure.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Some of you have like.
I do, thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time to